Thank you very much. I'd like to perhaps start off by extending my gratitude for the invitation to be part of this meeting. And thank you very much for everything and for being part of the meeting. I am going to try to time because I'm the one holding you from lunch. But in essence, the presentation is split up into four distinct areas. The first one is a context, and then the second area that we're going to look at is just innovation in South Africa, and also link that to South Africa. I think, starting point of view, one looks at Africa and the opportunity, and I think the opportunity is that Africa is in essence equivalent in terms of geographical size to United States, China, India, European Union, Japan, and Argentina. So that is in essence, I think, the size of the African continent geographically. It's rich in mineral resources, biodiversity, culture, democracies, significant coastlines. In essence, I'd like to believe that Africa is pregnant with possibilities. It's like a Chinese bamboo tree. And you see what I mean in the next couple of slides when we start to unpack in terms of what is happening in Africa compared to the rest of the world. And I think some of the things that are happening in Africa are things that are happening in Mexico. So the changing faces present themselves as opportunities, and in certain cases as challenges, and the challenges present themselves as opportunities. So if you look in terms of Africa, it's got a youthful population. I mean, that is a population profile of Kenya. South Africa is exactly the same. South Africa has got about 49.4% of the population is under the age of 25. I mean, you compare that to the United States, you compare that to Italy, it's very, very different. That is a projected growth of the African population in terms of 2013, and you can see that it's significantly a younger, population, and and the growth in terms of the population is going that way, and so the significantly high youthful population of the African continent presents opportunities, but it also presents challenges. And I think if one reflects in terms of what we've seen in North Africa, you can see some of the challenges, and some of the challenges become unemployment. It becomes trying to find opportunities for those young people, and if one doesn't find the opportunities, chances are you then have other issues that you're going to have to deal with. If you look at mobile connectivity, Africa has got the second fastest penetration rate. In fact, outside of Asia, is the highest penetration rate in terms of mobile connectivity. Even the poorest people in Africa have got a cell phone. And people are rather spending money on airtime as opposed to spending money on other luxuries or food. And the penetration rate provides other opportunities, because if one looks at the growth of a smartphone, it's projected that by 2017, 50% of the people, of the population in South Africa will have access to a smartphone. And so there are opportunities in terms of being not only users, but also to being generators of content, looking at bottom of the pyramid applications, looking at banking, looking at service delivery issues. And also the question is, how can you make the cell phone make that particular informal trader to be more formalized? And how can you be able to provide applications that can be best able to serve also the informal sector? If you look at urbanization, and for some of you that haven't been to South Africa, that is Cape Town, and that is Johannesburg, and that is another view of Johannesburg. So what you're seeing is a growing urbanization. 2030 is projected that it's going to be 50% urbanized. And with urbanization, what you suddenly get is really what you see in this picture here below. In Johannesburg, on the one hand, you've got one economy. On this particular part, you've got another economy, informal settlement. And with those particular informal settlements, there's certain solutions that have to be provided. Government has to provide solutions for that. There's issues in terms of just planning, issues in terms of how do you get services to those particular people. There's a high disease burden. So Africa accounts only for 12% of the world population. But when one looks at HIV and AIDS infection, there's 69% of the people living with HIV and AIDS in Africa. There's about 71% of deaths. And the question that we get confronted with is how can innovation reduce the number of infections, and how can it reduce the number of deaths? And these are the issues that we find ourselves as a science and technology park being confronted with. You look at the world's fastest growing economies, 7 of them currently are in Africa. And the big question really is, in terms of those particular 7 and more, is it sustainable? How can you sustain that particular growth? You look at the innovation base. These are the PCT applications. South Africa is the only African country projected in this particular graph. That is a comparison in terms of PCT patent applications originating from Mexico and South Africa. And the interesting thing is that the Mexican ones are on the increase, but we seem to be on the decline. We're seeing quite a number of hubs coming up in Africa in one form or another. So it's different kind of hubs, different kind of innovation centers, and I think it's also quite quite apparent even from the ISP that has changed its name to also include other centers of innovation. And what you're seeing is, for example, Kenya. There's a lot of iHubs focusing specifically on mobile technology. And so forth, and we're seeing that as well in terms of Ghana. When we turn and look at the innovation system in South Africa, it's really progressed from 1996. Soon after the independence in 1994, the South African government published a white paper on science and technology, and there have been a number of developments along that particular path. I think quite significant was the creation of a dedicated Department of Science and Technology in 2004, and then OECD review. And the 10-year innovation plan provides a lot of strategic direction in terms of what you should be focusing on. And what it talks about is 5 grand challenges, and perhaps what is relevant for this particular meeting is the first one, which is farmer to farmer. So it's a farmer with an F to a farmer with a P, where South Africa hopes to be a leader in biotech and pharmaceuticals. So it's unpacking the value chain in terms of pharmaceuticals and looking right from the beginning right through to the whole end. And then there's other issues in terms of space science and technology and energy security, climate change. And then in about 2008, there's an agency to focus on innovation that was established, and then the intellectual property framework that was established. Now, from this slide, we're then going to go into the innovation hub. So that is where South Africa is, and that is then that particular green part. And somewhere there is the province of Gauteng. That's where the innovation hub is based. Now, the province of Gauteng accounts for about 24% of the national population. It accounts for over 34% of the GDP of South Africa. It also is roughly about the 10% of the African GDP. It's about the 4th, 5th largest economy in Africa. It is about 40% SMEs in terms of the 22 universities in South Africa. There's about 6 of them, 6 of them that are hosted within the particular province. So, despite the fact that it's a very small province geographically, economically, it's very significant. And the province, in their wisdom, in about 2001, had the vision of creating a science and technology park. And that's when the Innovation Hub was conceived, and the reason it was conceived is this is a particular location of the Innovation Hub right here. And what you see on the side is a whole lot of technology centers. There's a CSIR which does about 200 million US dollars of research a year. There is National Research Foundation. There's also the Department of Science and Technology. There is Innovation Hub. There is the Center for Council for Higher Education. There is a Biodiversity Institute, and then within a 10-kilometer radius, there are about 4 universities. On one entrance to the Innovation Hub, there is the University of Pretoria, and then on the other entrance, that's the CSIR. And so that's how the location was chosen. And last year, in February, the province put out an innovation strategy, and the strategy focuses on 3 things. Firstly, increasing the competitiveness of firms in the province. Secondly, looking at service delivery of government. Thirdly, looking at inclusivity around innovation and how can one get the masses of people within the communities to be involved in terms of innovation and scaling it out. And then there's a number of areas that are highlighted, and I think quite important, we believe, is the issue around government procurement and how one can be able to use government procurement to be able to spur innovation. And so the Innovation Hub has been charged, in essence, with implementation of this particular strategy. And this summarizes, in essence, the core business. So our core business as a park is to establish and manage an enabling environment and initiatives to support innovation, enterprise development, and human capability development in targeted sectors. So the targeted sectors are ICT, green economy, biosciences, and industry. The first part of that is quite important, for us because it highlights the infrastructure part of the park, and secondly, the programs, part of the park. And I'll come back to that because it's quite important to keep that balance. If you don't keep the balance, you're going to run into trouble. And I'll show you how we ran into trouble because we lost the balance. So these are some of the buildings. We own 2 buildings, and then there's another 2 buildings that are privately owned. One building is owned by SAPI, which is one of the largest paper and pulp companies. The other one, which is right there in the background, is owned by Vegan Africa, which is an infrastructure and engineering company. So the first phase of this particular project was started off in 2001 and went up to 2006. And this was a pilot phase when the infrastructure was being put up, and it was piloted at the CSIR. So the partners in that first phase was the CSIR, University of Pretoria, and the government of the province of Gauteng. When the park was opened in 2006, the University of Pretoria and the CSIR were no longer partners. So it was just the government that was running with it. So the management company was set up to be able to operate the particular company. And so 2006 to 2010, the focus was meant to be Maxim, which is our incubator, Coach Lab, which is a skills development program, Activator, focusing on the triple helix, and the RIS being working with the municipalities. But by 2010, these programs were not doing what they were meant to be doing. The focus has suddenly shifted to infrastructure and facilities. And so increasingly the question was being asked by the politicians, but what are you doing about innovation? And in essence, I was brought in 2011, at the end of 2010, and I started 2011 to be able to try to then start the repositioning and reconfiguration for growth. And what we defined with the team was that what really needed to be done was look at relevance and innovation focus. And so the importance of the context, which I pointed out at the beginning, because those are the things that matter to the politicians. So for us to be relevant, for us to continue to get funded, we needed to focus on the issues affecting the people on a daily basis, issues of unemployment, issues of how innovation can be able to serve society, issues of how innovation can increase government competitiveness and service delivery, and so forth. And so the current phase, which is a 5-year phase that we're in, is really reconfiguration, innovation focus, and infrastructure expansion. But we're looking at infrastructure expansion to be able to support, in essence, the programs. So where we were at the end of 2010, occupancy levels were dropping, and we dropped down to about 46% at the end of 2011. So we continued dropping. When I started, we were at about 58%, and we continued sliding and sliding and sliding up until 46%. Right now, as I speak to you, we are 100% full, and we've got a pipeline. And I'll talk very briefly in terms of what have we done in a ride to be able to get to that level, and all it was is also bringing the right kind of people into the organization. For me, I think what is quite important is that if you are the CEO or the head of the science park, you've got to be involved in terms of bringing each and every single person into that organization. So I single-handedly sat in all the interviews of each and every single person on my staff. And I made sure that whoever they were going to be reporting to was also on the interview panel. But I sat in there. There were two things that we were looking for. The one thing was, would this person subscribe to our values as an organization? And then the second thing is, do they have the competence to be able to do the job? And on the values, it was really looking around, are they concerned about themselves or are they concerned about serving? Because as a science and technology park, you exist because of the people on the park. So it's quite important to invest time in finding the right people. Are you going to be right all the time? No. There were some bad hires that we've made. And in certain cases where I've not sat in the interviews, and there's two of them, the people did not last in the organization. Because you find that the values don't mix. I mean, the most recent one, the person only stayed 2.5 months. And when we started to enforce the values, they resigned. But that's fine, and you've got to keep on communicating to the staff what is happening. I think communication is quite important. So that is the organizational structure that we've built. We've got a strategic R&D and innovation programs. This interfaces with the research community, with the universities. The Biosciences Park, we're establishing a Biosciences Park as a subset of the bigger park to focus on building a cluster on biosciences. We've set up the innovation strategy projects, so part of what we've got to do in terms of implementing the innovation strategy is run a number of competitions and do a few open innovation platforms, and I'll show you a couple of examples. We then have an enterprise and skills development in a unit, and this focuses on incubation. And under our incubation programs, we have a focus on ICT, which is MAXAM. We have a focus on Green Economy, Climate Innovation Center, and we're doing this in collaboration with the World Bank, InfoDev. We've got a focus on biosciences, and then we've got a skills development program that we run with industry. These ones, we put in the money. Government puts in the money. The skills development program, we don't put in any money. Industry funds it completely. So it's industry relevant programs. Then the value-added services and IP management falls within that particular unit. And then we've got a corporate affairs and business development that looks after infrastructure and facilities and marketing and communications. And then finance and compliance is a big issue. And I realize when you're talking about what happens in Mexico around procurement, it's just the same in South Africa. It just takes too much time. So we've got quite a big unit that is headed up by the CFO, looking at in terms of supply chain management, and just making sure people get paid. And then within the office of the CEO, this is a new area. We've moved ICT infrastructure there, strategic partnerships. So there's an executive that looks after that. So that's in essence the structure that we have. And we bring on people on 3-year contracts, based on project money and availability of funds. So just looking at some of the programs, human capability expansion, there's a coach lab program, which is a 9-month program with industry. Then there's a GAP program that we run in partnership with Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. We have a number of internship programs where we place interns within companies within the park, but also companies, technology-based companies in the province. And then we run a number of workshops and training. So the flagship one being what we call the Innovate. So Innovate, we get experts in the field, they come together in the form of a panel, and then we have a topic that we talk about. We attract anything between 100 and 220 people for those particular evenings. And we run this for about an hour and a half, and then there's a networking afterwards. The major benefit of Innovate is just the linkages, the networking, because we provide a platform for people to then network with industry. On enterprise development, I've mentioned the Climate Innovation Center, which we have started with the World Bank. There's about 3 of them in Africa. There's one in Kenya. South Africa is the second one. A third one is opening up in Ethiopia. And the idea is to be able to connect them. There's a 4th one that's opening up in Trinidad and Tobago. So we have a strategic relationship with Kariri, and so they're linking up and we're supporting them in the establishment of the CIC in the Caribbean. And then that's our main incubator. This particular one, again with Emory, but this particular phase focuses on biotechnology. This GAP mobile and green is an innovation competition, and this particular one, what you're looking for is really in a platform for sourcing local innovations that can be piloted in government. So we've got a number that have been found, and we basically then try to then do the pilot so that when we get to the public procurement process, it becomes much easier for government to then procure those particular solutions. Because generally, if the government goes through a normal procurement process, the small, medium enterprises would not be successful. But if you allow for a pilot, a scaled-up pilot that demonstrates benefits, then one is then able to take advantage of some of the provisions within the procurement regulations. Now looking at also the opportunities being presented by mobile, we've set up what we call an M-Lab, again with the support of the World Bank, the Finnish government, Nokia, and this is a mobile laboratory. So we teamed up with CSIR, a startup company within the Innovation Hub, to be able to set up the lab, and the lab has got a number of test beds so that people can develop applications and then run them on different kind of cell phones. And that is a hackathon that was taking place, sponsored by Nokia and Microsoft. And we're seeing quite a number of innovations coming out of that. Now, part of the thing, going back to choosing people, we had a manager here. The manager was not aligned to the kind of people that we were expecting here. These are young people. Generally, most of them are under the age of 30. And they need somebody that can talk their language, be able to do things the way that they want to do, have the freedom. And we battled with the first manager, and the facility was empty. Most of the time you go there, you not even find one entrepreneur. And we went out and recruited a manager, much young, from Nokia. And if you come there now, you find it buzzing. Last 2 weeks ago, we had the Global Forum on Entrepreneurship in South Africa, sponsored by the World Bank, and one of the entrepreneurs from MLab the third prize out of the top 50 global companies. And so we're seeing some nurturing happening. Now, this particular program that we have is also an initiative of the innovation strategy, and what it talks about is looking at creating linkages between challenges that exist in government and the private sector to solutions that exist at universities and small medium enterprises, and in some cases those solutions might even exist in large corporations. So we're creating, in essence, a marketplace, for innovation, and so the solution, the exchange is there, and so we work with the people that have got problems, whether it be large corporations, municipalities, and so forth, to then be able to identify people that will be able to provide those solutions. And we've been running this now, since December. And what we're seeing, this is an example, Transnet, which is basically the largest rail company in South Africa. They put out a challenge, and the challenge was we need to find innovations that can then be able to minimize the risk of vehicles entering the railway crossings, because they're finding that it costs them a lot of money, but also there were a lot of deaths that would happen whenever vehicles went in.
Elaborate a bit more on that Belt and Innovation Strategy. Please.
So, the request is to elaborate on the Gauteng Innovation Strategy. So the strategy is, in essence, it's got three pillars. It's a strategy for the province. And the first pillar is competitiveness of firms within the province. So there's a number of initiatives that have been identified to focus on that. And then the second pillar is service delivery and efficiency of government. So within that, we need to then find innovations that talk to service delivery. How can government become much more efficient through innovation? And then the third part is the social-based kind of innovations. So quite often, in most settings, people are forced to innovate within their own settings, and they have those particular innovations within that particular local setting, and the idea is to identify them and then try to scale them up so that they can be used by other societies, and in some cases adopted by other people outside the country. So the strategy is, in essence, it was only passed last year. And then there's some of the initiatives is focusing on open innovation. So we are trying to find programs, put together programs that will highlight the benefits of open innovation, as opposed to R&D, large R&D labs. What we found was that many companies no longer do have large R&D capabilities, but also what we're seeing is, even with the changes around the intellectual property regime, there's more knowledge that is existing outside. So how can you bring that in? And then the competitions was a way of this just starting to stimulate innovation. So with each of the competitions, what we do is, other than just the normal prize money, we provide also seed funding, and then incubation support for them to then start to get the ideas through to prototype and into the market. So this particular challenge, it closed in February, and in essence this is what it looks like. So we basically advertise it on the portal. So you can basically Google, for example, Innovation Hub, Open Innovation Solution Exchange, and you then be able to get onto the portal and see what challenges we're running. We're currently running a challenge with one of the largest food company in South Africa that's looking for particular solutions. So I think in conclusion, our story is perhaps, I think it's very similar to some of the stories that I've heard this morning. Infrastructure is important, but it's also important not to place too much emphasis on infrastructure. the infrastructure must be grown to be able to support, the innovations. And so, in essence, I've listened to the story of Ellis, and I think it's a very, good story to be able to tell, to other people, because there's an industry pull. There is a focus in terms of trying to bring in industry, and it looks like your phased approach is the right approach. Build the park in a phased approach that accommodates, the demand, and the needs. I think, context is quite important, and I heard earlier as well that no one science park is similar to the next one. So there will be differences, and quite often in the earlier stages when I took over, there was always a temptation to try to duplicate what happens in Tigers Park in Portugal or what happens elsewhere. But later on, we say to ourselves, we sat down with the team that had assembled, and the team said, you know what, we've got to customize it for South Africa. Let's use examples that are out there as best examples, but let's customize it, but then let's find strategic partnerships, and each one of those strategic partnerships we need to find only one or two initiatives, and that is what we're going to partner on. And quite often part of the danger is that you start to have too many partnerships and relationships, and you find that an MOU has got 5 to 10 issues that you want to cover, because it won't be done. Rather find one or two things that you can then be able to implement and then do. So those are some of the issues that we've dealt with. But I think quite important in closing is also to perhaps highlight how do we then keep everything going internally, because in our case what has happened is that in essence we've also grown, and in growing it's also important to make sure that the scoreboard is also visible to everyone. So there's targets that we set on an annual basis, but also what we found was that the targets are set in essence almost as a coach's scoreboard. And the players, when they're playing, they need to see the scoreboard. It needs to be visible. It's either they're winning or losing. And so part of what we've started to develop is every 2 weeks, the management team gets together, and for an hour, all they do is just review the scoreboard. Are we winning? Are we losing? And it's as quick as a person comes in and says, this is what I said I was going to do last week, 2 weeks ago, this is what I've done, and these are the results that I got, these are the challenges that I faced, and this is the kind of help that I require, and this is how far we are from the quarterly target. And so, that way, each person takes accountability, and they're the ones that set the goal in terms of what has to be achieved. Because at the beginning, I basically say to them, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And then eventually I realize it's not happening, because accountability did not lie with them. And so part of the culture that we're busy inculcating is that each person has got to be responsible for setting and achieving the target, and everybody else will support them according to them specifying what they require and what they have done themselves. So that is quite important. This is just a summary in terms of some of the companies in the park. There's also the city of Tshwane, which is one of the 3 metros within the province. That has also taken residents. I have not included the incubated companies. Also, we've just recently had SANSA, which is the South African National Space Agency, take site, and we're busy currently facilitating a collaboration with the Russians. There's a collaboration already, but this one is with a specific park, in Moscow. And then also what we have, which is I think of interest, is VX Pharma, and this is a phase 2 CRO focusing on pharmaceuticals, and this is part of the growth of the biopark. Thank you very much.
Could you please tell us what's the government expenditure in science and technology in terms of gross domestic product?
It's currently at about 0.9%, but I think it's sliding backwards as well because GDP has grown, but also the South African government has been impacted by the recent recession. But the aspiration is to grow up to 2% of GDP, which is quite a tough call because GDP is growing. So the investment needs to be quite big. So, but also in order to facilitate that, what you're seeing is more incentives, tax incentives for business to start to invest in R&D as well. So it's a 150% tax incentive that the government has introduced for R&D. A tax incentive.
Any other question? I think it was an excellent presentation by McLean. So, probably too hungry. Si no hay más preguntas, le damos las gracias.